They say loneliness is a quiet thief. It creeps into the corners of your life, not with a bang, but with the soft hush of unspoken words and the echo of empty rooms. For 3 years, my solitude had been a carefully curated sanctuary after the storm of divorce. I'd built walls of routine and found comfort in the predictable rhythm of days spent alone. And then, on a day much like today, rain lashing against the windows, the sky a bruised gray, a young man walked into my life, carrying not just a toolbox but a disruption I hadn't anticipated, a crack in my carefully constructed peace. It started so mundanely, you see, with a simple plumbing issue and unfolded into something I still grapple with, even now. The rain, relentless and melancholic, mirrored my mood that afternoon. It was the kind of rain that seemed to wash the color out of the world, leaving everything in shades of gray and dampness. I was nestled in my favorite armchair, the worn velvet conforming to my shape like an old friend, a book lying open in my lap, though my mind was far from its pages. Tea, Earl Grey, just as I liked it, sat cooling in its china cup on the side table. Around me, the house was quiet, profoundly so. 3 years. 3 years since Robert had walked out, taking with him not just his belongings but a significant chunk of the vibrant noise that had once filled this home. In its place, I had cultivated a different kind of richness, the richness of solitude, of being answerable to no one but myself. The leaky faucet, a persistent drip, drip, drip from the kitchen sink, had been a minor annoyance for weeks, a soundtrack to my solitude. Finally, I'd relented and called a plumber, justifying it as a necessary household repair. Honestly, it was more about the anticipation of something different, a break in the monotony, however small. Life had become, predictably, comfortable, and comfort, I was beginning to realize, could be a gilded cage. The doorbell rang a sharp, insistent sound that sliced through the afternoon quite like a knife. Irritated, I marked my page and rose, pulling my cardigan tighter around me. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw a young man, drenched despite the pathetic awning of my porch, holding a clipboard and looking utterly out of place in my quiet, leafy suburb. Plumber, his ID badge declared when I opened the door. Daniel, sent to fix the faucet. He was younger than I'd imagined, barely out of his 20s, I guessed. His hair was plastered to his forehead by the rain, and his cheeks were flushed with the cold. There was an earnestness in his eyes, a kind of open vulnerability that was disarming. "Mrs. Eleanor?" he asked, his voice a pleasant baritone, tinged with a slight nervousness that I found oddly endearing. I corrected him gently on my marital status, a reflex after so many years, and ushered him in, suddenly aware of the faint scent of lavender and old books that permeated my home. He brought with him the scent of rain and something else, something indefinably vital. He set about his task with quiet efficiency, opening his toolbox and laying out wrenches and pipes on my kitchen counter. I hovered, offering tea, which he accepted with a grateful smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. We talked as he worked. Small talk at first. The weather, the trials of home ownership, the usual pleasantries. But gradually, imperceptibly, the conversation deepened. He spoke of his apprenticeship, his ambition to master his craft, and his quiet pride in solving practical problems. I, in turn, found myself sharing snippets of my life, my career as a librarian, my love for literature, and the quiet joy I found in my garden. Things I hadn't articulated to anyone in years. It wasn't just what we said, but how we said it. There was a lightness in his laughter, a genuine interest in his questions. And in my responses, I heard a voice I hadn't realized had grown so quiet, so accustomed to speaking only to itself. He listened with an attentiveness that was almost unnerving, his gaze direct, unwavering, yet devoid of any judgment. It was as if he saw me, truly saw me, not just as the older woman whose faucet he was fixing, but as a person. As he finished tightening the last pipe, demonstrating the now silent faucet with quiet satisfaction, I felt a strange stirring within me. It wasn't just gratitude for his efficient service. It was something else. A warmth, a flicker, of something I couldn't quite name, but hadn't felt in a very long time. He packed up his tools, the rain outside still drumming a steady rhythm against the glass. "There you go," he said, stepping back to admire his handiwork. "No more drips." And then he looked at me, really looked at me, and at that moment, the mundane tranquility of my afternoon shattered, replaced by a question I hadn't dared. The silence after Daniel left felt different. It wasn't the comfortable silence of solitude I had grown accustomed to, but a charged emptiness, humming with the ghost of his presence. The kitchen, moments ago filled with the quiet clatter of tools, and the murmur of conversation now seemed stark, almost accusingly, still. I busied myself wiping down the counter where he had worked, my mind replaying snippets of our exchange like a favorite melody caught on repeat. His easy smile, the way his brow furrowed slightly when he concentrated, the genuine curiosity in his questions, these details, inconsequential in themselves, now danced at the edges of my awareness, refusing to fade. Loneliness, I realized, wasn't just about being alone. It was about the absence of connection, the lack of that spark of recognition in another's eyes, the unspoken acknowledgement that you are seen, you are heard, you matter. For 3 years, I had convinced myself that solitude was enough, that books and gardens and quiet evenings were sufficient sustenance for a life lived fully. And perhaps, in a way, they were. But Daniel's unexpected arrival had stirred something dormant within me, a yearning I had long suppressed, the quiet ache for human connection that no amount of solitude could truly extinguish. I went back to the kitchen sink, turning the faucet on and off, listening to the blessedly silent flow of water. The absence of the persistent drip was noticeable. A small victory against household entropy. But even the satisfaction of a fixed faucet couldn't quite dispel the lingering sense of unease. It wasn't unease in a negative sense, not fear or anxiety, but rather a gentle tremor of anticipation, a hesitant curiosity about what might be. I returned to the armchair, the book still lying open, mocking my attempt at normalcy. The rain had intensified, drumming against the windows with a louder, more insistent rhythm. It felt like the world outside was mirroring the turmoil within me, the quiet storm brewing beneath the surface of my carefully composed exterior. I thought about Robert, inevitably. 3 years. A significant time, and yet sometimes it felt like yesterday. The bitterness had long since faded, replaced by a kind of wistful acceptance. We had built a life together once, a life that had crumbled under the weight of unspoken resentments and diverging paths. The divorce had been painful, yes, but also, in a strange way, liberating. I had found a measure of peace in my solitude, a quiet strength in being self-sufficient. But had I, in my pursuit of peace, inadvertently closed myself off to the possibility of joy? Daniel was young, undeniably so. The age difference was significant. And yet, in our brief conversation, I hadn't felt the chasm of years that separated us. He hadn't treated me with the patronizing politeness that sometimes came with younger interactions, nor had he dismissed me as irrelevant or out of touch. He had simply talked to me as an equal, as a fellow human being, sharing a moment in time, a brief respite from the gray monotony of a rainy afternoon. The thought of him lingered, persistent and unsettlingly pleasant. I found myself wondering about his day, his life beyond my kitchen, and the dreams he had spoken of with such youthful fervor. Was he lonely too? Did he, beneath that easy smile and confident demeanor, carry his own quiet burdens? The shared sense of loneliness we had touched upon in our conversation resonated deeply. It was a universal human experience, this ache for connection, this fear of being unseen, unheard, and unloved. And in Daniel's eyes, I had glimpsed a flicker of that same vulnerability, a shared understanding that transcended age and circumstance. The rain finally began to subside, the sky lightening to a softer, less oppressive gray. A sliver of weak sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a pale, watery light across the room. I stood up, restless, drawn to the window. The world outside seemed to have shifted, subtly, almost imperceptibly. The familiar landscape of my garden, the quiet street, the houses across the way, they all seemed different, charged with a new possibility, a whisper of something yet to unfold. And in the stillness that followed the rain, I heard not just the afternoon wore on, punctuated by the tick-tock of the grandfather clock, each tick hitting my tenuous composure. I tried to read, but words dissolved into a nonsensical mess. My mind darted to Daniel, his smile, his voice, and his presence in my kitchen. Absurd, really. He was a plumber. I was just me, a single woman of a certain age. There was no grounds for imparting this interim meeting with any deeper meaning than that of a service call. Yet the feeling remained, a hum of curiosity or longing. A reckless urge to step beyond the perimeter of my life and embrace the unpredictable, no matter how irrational it was. I opened up my closet, which I had neglected for years. Fashion had turned functional and utilitarian, and the provocative cuts and bold silks had given way to sensible wools and muted colors. Something else occurred today. A mutinous fire was kindled within me, a whisper of revolt against my usual. I set aside the cardigans and sensible skirts for a dress I could not recall wearing in years, a dress from a different life. Luxurious burgundy silk shimmered in the light, caressing my secret curves. It was daring, almost sinful, and temptingly. Sensual hesitation clashed with impulse. Logic reminded me of the absurdity. What was I doing? To dress up in a dress for a long-forgotten plumber who likely didn't even recall my name was pathetic. It was the desperate act of a lonely woman. But another part of me asked, what if this was more than just a plumber and a faucet? What if it was about something more? What if it was about having the courage to feel, hope, and love something new and unexpected at this stage of my life? The rebellious voice won out. I let out a sigh and unbuttoned my cardigan, removed it, and grabbed the red dress. The silk brushed against my skin, tantalizing my senses. As I buttoned up, I noticed a changed woman, not younger, but very much alive. Fire burned in her eyes, Her cheeks glowed, and an inner confidence radiated from every pore. It was the dress, yet also the bravery, daring, and readiness to move out of my solitude and into the unfamiliar. When I fiddled with the neckline, the doorbell rang once more. My heart was pounding. It couldn't be. Maybe? I stepped towards the door, steps lighter, breath caught in my throat. Through the peephole, I saw Daniel on my porch, standing there, uncertainly with a small, crumpled paper bag. I opened the door, ready to ask, but he interrupted me, stammering, "Mrs. Eleanor, I left the faucet's warranty. Besides, would you like to have a pastry from the corner bakery? They're very good." He offered the paper bag, avoiding my gaze. He locked eyes with me, and at that moment, the defenses around my heart dissolved. He saw the provocative crimson silk dress, but also the vulnerability and the hope. I saw recognition, comprehension, and a flicker of like spark in his eyes. The pastry bag fell from his hands onto the porch mat. He stepped closer, his eyes meeting mine. Without a word or second thought, he kissed me. It began softly, a bit uncertain, but quickly grew deeper and warmer. This kiss ignited a fire inside me that I thought had long burned out. It exposed our shared loneliness and a surprising connection. It felt like stepping boldly into something new and unknown. The kiss tasted of rain and pastry, full of the exciting promise of a fresh start. In that moment, something significant shifted inside me. It was more than just attraction. It was about recognizing something deeply human. It's hard to describe, isn't it? This sudden connection, especially as we age. Maybe you felt this way too, or you're curious about what's next for Eleanor and Daniel. If so, you might understand why I wanted to share this story. If you enjoy stories about infidelity in relationships, forbidden desires, life's surprises, age, DAP relationships, and the feelings that touch us deeply, think about subscribing to this channel. I'll be sharing more personal stories and exploring how we connect with each other. You might even see some of your own experiences reflected in mine. Life is full of surprises, isn't it? Now the morning after tasted like whispered uncertainties. Pale and tentative sunlight filtered through the bedroom curtains, painting stripes of light across the rumpled sheets. Daniel was still asleep beside me, his breathing deep and even, his young face softened in repose. I watched him for a long moment, a strange mix of emotions swirling within me, wonder, disbelief, a giddy sense of possibility, yes, but also a tremor of fear, a hesitant question mark hanging over the dawn. The kiss, the night. It had been impulsive, unexpected, a whirlwind of emotions unleashed in a moment of shared vulnerability. And now, in the clear light of morning, the reality of it all began to settle in, bringing with it a wave of, what? Panic? No, not panic exactly. More like apprehension. A cautious stepping back from the precipice of recklessness, a hesitant glance over the shoulder at the familiar safety of solitude. He stirred, his eyelids fluttering open, his gaze unfocused for a moment, then sharpening, focusing on me. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile that banished the last vestiges of sleep and replaced them with a warmth that chased away the morning chill. "Morning," he murmured, his voice still thick with sleep. Did last night happen?" The question hung in the air between us, unspoken but palpable. Did it really happen? Or was it just a dream, a fleeting illusion conjured up in the rain-soaked quiet of a lonely afternoon? I reached out, tracing the line of his jaw with my fingertips, the stubble rough against my skin. "It happened," I whispered back, my voice barely audible. "It really happened." We lay in silence for a while longer, the only sound the gentle rhythm of our breathing, the distant chirping of birds outside the window. The unspoken questions lingered, heavy and unanswered. What now? Where did we go from here? Was this just a fleeting moment of connection, a brief detour from the paths of our separate lives? Or was it something more? Something lasting? Finally, I rose, pulling the sheets around me, the coolness of the morning air raising goosebumps on my skin. "Tea," I said, my voice a little stronger now, a little more confident. "I think we both need tea." He nodded, pushing himself up, the sheets falling away to reveal the lean, youthful contours of his body. I averted my gaze, a blush rising to my cheeks despite myself. This was new territory, uncharted waters. And I, a woman who had prided herself on her composure, her control, felt suddenly adrift, uncertain of the currents, unsure of the destination. We went to the kitchen together, the now silent faucet gleaming faintly in the dim light. It was a mundane act, a simple morning ritual, but in that moment it felt significant. A shared space, a silent acknowledgement. Of the night before, a tentative step into the uncertain territory of us. We moved around each other in the small kitchen, a clumsy dance of hesitant intimacy, a silent negotiation of boundaries, unspoken questions hanging in the air like the steam rising from our teacups. We sat at the kitchen table, sipping our tea, the silence stretching between us, no longer charged with unspoken desire, but with a different kind of tension. The tension of uncertainty, of unspoken hopes and fears. He looked at me, his eyes searching, questioning. "Eleanor," he began, his voice hesitant, "about last night." I held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't," I said softly. "Not yet. Let's just have tea and see what the morning brings." He nodded again, understanding flickering in his eyes. We drank our tea in silence, the unspoken questions still hanging in the air but now mingled with a fragile, nascent hope. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, warming our faces, chasing away the last shadows of the night. And in the shared silence, in the simple act of sipping tea together, I felt a flicker of something new begin to dawn. The hesitant, fragile, but undeniably present promise of a... The days that followed were a delicate dance of discovery, a tentative exploration of uncharted emotional landscapes. Daniel and I navigated the unfamiliar terrain of our burgeoning connection with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, like explorers charting a new continent, unsure of what wonders or perils lay ahead. We talked, endlessly it seemed, about everything and nothing, peeling back the layers of our lives, revealing vulnerabilities, sharing dreams, acknowledging fears. The age difference, initially a looming shadow, began to recede, replaced by the growing realization of our shared humanity, our mutual yearning for connection, our surprising resonance of spirit. He was younger, yes, undeniably so. But his youth wasn't a barrier, but rather a source of refreshing energy, a vibrant counterpoint to the quiet rhythms of my life. He brought with him a lightness of spirit, an optimism that had been dimmed in my own life by the years and the weight of experience. And I, in turn, offered him something he seemed to crave, a sense of groundedness, a quiet wisdom gleaned from a life lived, a perspective that transcended the immediacy of youth. We walked in my garden, the late summer, blooms still clinging to life, their colors muted but still vibrant against the encroaching autumn. He admired my roses, their velvety petals unfurling in the gentle breeze, and I found myself explaining the nuances of pruning, the delicate balance of nurturing and letting go. It was a metaphor, of course, for life, for relationships, for the delicate dance of connection and independence. We laughed, easily, unexpectedly, a lightness of being that had been absent from my life for far too long. He told me stories of his clumsy attempts at cooking, his passion for vintage motorcycles, his dreams of mastering his craft as a plumber, and maybe even opening his own business one day. I shared anecdotes from my years as a librarian, the quiet joys of discovering hidden literary treasures, the profound connections forged through shared stories. But beneath the laughter and shared moments, the uncertainties lingered. The question of longevity, of the sustainability of this unexpected connection, hovered unspoken between us. Could this last? Could something so improbable, so unconventional, truly blossom into something real? The world outside, I knew, would raise its eyebrows, would whisper its judgments, would question the validity of a connection that defied societal norms, that blurred the lines of age and expectation. And those whispers, those judgments, echoed in the quiet corners of my mind, fueling the hesitant doubts that still flickered beneath the surface of my newfound hope. Yet despite the uncertainties, despite the lingering questions, there was an undeniable sense of rightness to it all. A feeling deep in my bones that this connection, however improbable, however fleeting it might prove to be, was something precious, something to be cherished, something to be embraced, however cautiously, however tentatively. We made tea together every morning, a ritual that had become imbued with a deeper meaning, a symbol of our tentative new beginning. And as we sipped our tea, side by side at the kitchen table, the sunlight streaming through the window, warming our faces, I allowed myself to indulge in a quiet, fragile hope. Hope that this unexpected connection, this improbable love, might just be real. Hope that life, even in its later chapters, can still surprise us with moments of unexpected joy, with the rediscovery of intimacy, with the promise of new beginnings. And in the quiet stillness after the drip, drip, drip had stopped, I sensed not just silence, but the faint. Thank you for listening. Do you like these infidelity stories? Drop a comment below. Turn on notifications and subscribe so you don't miss any new infidelity stories.